There is a quiet struggle that lives inside many hearts, a struggle that does not shout but gently tightens its grip over time, the fear of what others might think. It is strange how unseen voices can shape visible lives, how opinions that do not belong to us can still decide the direction we walk in. Somewhere along the way, many begin to measure their worth through eyes that were never meant to define them, forgetting that a life built for approval is never a life fully lived. But there comes a moment when the soul begins to question this silent arrangement, when it wonders what would happen if it finally chose freedom over fear, truth over approval, and its own voice over the noise of the world. You were not born to live as a reflection in someone else's mirror. And yet, so often, people wake up and quietly adjust themselves according to what they believe others expect to see. They soften their opinions before speaking them. They shrink their dreams so they do not appear too ambitious. They choose silence over honesty, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are afraid of how it might be received. In doing so, they begin to lose the shape of their own identity, slowly replacing it with an image that is easier for others to accept. But ease in the eyes of others often comes at the cost of truth within yourself. There is a deep difference between being seen and being understood. When you live only as a reflection of other people's expectations, you may be seen by many, but you are never truly known, not even by yourself. The mirror of society is often distorted, bending your image to fit its comfort, its traditions, its fears. And if you stand too long trying to adjust yourself to that reflection, you begin to forget what your true face looked like before the world started naming you. But your life was never meant to be a borrowed identity. It was meant to be a discovery. Every dream you have, every strange desire that does not fit neatly into someone else's approval, is a quiet reminder that you are meant to live beyond imitation. There is something sacred in choosing to step away from the need to be validated. It is not rebellion for the sake of defiance, it is return for the sake of truth. A return to the self that existed before fear learned your name. People will always hold mirrors up to you. Some will tell you who they think you should be, and others will insist they know what is best for your life. But no mirror outside of you can ever capture the full depth of your becoming. At some point, you must learn to stop asking every reflection for permission to exist. You must begin to trust the quiet voice within that has been speaking long before the world ever tried to define you. And when you finally choose to step out of those borrowed reflections, something powerful happens. The weight of constant performance begins to fall away. You start breathing in a way that is not shaped by fear. You start walking without rehearsing every step. You begin to understand that your life was never meant to be a copy of what is acceptable, but an expression of what is true. And in that truth, even if it feels unfamiliar at first, there is a freedom that no opinion can take away. Fear of judgment often speaks louder than your own inner truth. It begins quietly, almost politely, as if it is trying to protect you. It tells you to think twice before you speak, to reconsider before you act, to wait until you are sure that no one will disapprove. At first, it seems reasonable. After all, everyone wants to be accepted, to be understood, to belong somewhere. But slowly, that voice grows louder than your own inner knowing, until you start to confuse caution with silence and approval with safety. There is a strange power in imagined judgment. Even when no one is speaking, the mind can create an audience that is always watching, always evaluating, always ready to criticize. And in that invisible courtroom, you begin to defend choices you have not even made yet. You rehearse explanations for a life you have not yet lived. You adjust your dreams before they have had a chance to fully form. In doing so, you give authority to voices that are not truly present, but deeply influential. Your inner truth however, does not shout. It does not argue or compete. It speaks in a quieter language, often felt more than heard. It appears in moments of clarity, in the gentle pull towards something that feels meaningful even if it feels unfamiliar. But when fear of judgment dominates, that inner voice is pushed further and further into the background until it becomes something you only remember in rare, still moments. What makes this fear so powerful is not that people are constantly judging you, but that you begin to believe they are. And once that belief takes hold, you start living as if you are always being observed. You edit your authenticity to avoid imagined rejection. You trade honesty for acceptance, unaware that the acceptance you are gaining is for a version of yourself that is incomplete. Yet there comes a turning point in every life shaped by fear. It may arrive quietly, through exhaustion or through reflection, but it arrives nonetheless. You begin to notice how much of your life has been arranged around avoiding disapproval rather than pursuing truth. And in that awareness, something shifts. You start to realize that the cost of constant approval is the loss of your own direction. Your inner truth does not disappear, it waits. It waits beneath the noise of expectation, beneath the pressure to conform, beneath the fear of being misunderstood. And when you finally begin to listen again, even faintly, you realize it has always been there, steady and unchanged. It does not demand perfection, only honesty. It does not ask for applause, only acknowledgement. And in that moment of reconnection, fear begins to lose its authority, not all at once and not without resistance, but gradually. You start to understand that judgment, whether real or imagined, cannot define the value of your existence. What defines you is the willingness to hear yourself again, even when the world feels louder. Not everyone who watches your life understands your journey. This is a truth that often takes time to fully settle into the heart, because in the beginning, there is a natural desire to be understood by everyone who sees you. You want your choices to make sense to others, your struggles to be recognized, your intentions to be seen clearly without distortion. But life slowly reveals something different. Understanding is not as common as observation, and attention is not the same as comprehension. People may witness your steps, but they do not always know the weight you are carrying while taking them. They may see your success, but not the nights you spent questioning whether you were capable of reaching it. They may notice your silence, but not the thoughts that were too heavy to turn into words. Every person views your life through the lens of their own experiences, their own limitations, their own beliefs about what is possible. And because of that, what they see is often incomplete, sometimes even inaccurate, no matter how sincere they may be. Yet, there is a quiet expectation many carry, to be fully understood before they are allowed to move forward. This expectation can become a hidden burden, shaping decisions in subtle ways. You may find yourself delaying your growth until others approve of it, or explaining yourself endlessly in hopes of being seen more clearly. But understanding from others is not always something you can control, and waiting for it can keep you standing still in places you were meant to pass through. Your journey is not meant to be a public explanation. It is something lived, not constantly justified. There will be seasons when you walk through confusion while others assume you are lost, and seasons when you are growing quietly while others think nothing is happening at all. But life rarely reveals its meaning in real time to those who are watching from the outside. It unfolds inwardly first, long before it becomes visible outwardly. There is a kind of freedom that begins to grow when you accept this. When you stop expecting every observer to understand your path, you begin to move with less hesitation. You no longer feel the need to translate every decision into something universally acceptable. Instead, you start to trust the internal compass that has been guiding you even when others could not see its direction. And over time, something important becomes clear. Misunderstanding does not invalidate your journey. It only confirms that it belongs to you. Because if everyone could fully interpret your path from the outside, it would no longer be uniquely yours. There is depth in walking a road that only you can fully understand, even if others are simply watching its surface. So you continue, not with the expectation of being fully seen by everyone, but with the quiet acceptance that your life does not need to be fully understood to be fully real. Approval is borrowed, self-respect is earned within, and this is something life teaches slowly, often through disappointment and reflection rather than instruction. Approval from others feels immediate, almost rewarding in the moment. A nod, a compliment, a sign of acceptance. It creates a brief sense of belonging, as if you are finally aligned with the world around you. But what is easily given is also easily taken away. Opinions shift, relationships change, and the same voices that once affirmed you may one day question you. That is the fragile nature of borrowed approval. It rests in hands that are never fully still. Self-respect, however, is different. It does not arrive from outside recognition. It is shaped in private moments, when no one is watching, when choices are made without applause or validation. It is built in the quiet discipline of staying true to what you know is right for yourself, even when it is not widely understood. There is no instant reward in this process. In fact, at times, it feels like you are walking against invisible resistance. But something stronger is being formed within you, an inner stability that does not depend on shifting opinions. Many people spend years trying to collect approval like currency, believing that enough of it will eventually create a sense of worth. But approval can never fill the space that only self-respect is meant to occupy. It can decorate a life, but it cannot ground it. You can be surrounded by praise and still feel uncertain if you have not learned to stand firmly in your own judgment. And you can be misunderstood by many, yet feel deeply steady if you know you have not betrayed yourself in the process. There comes a moment when you begin to notice the difference between being accepted and being aligned. Acceptance asks you to adjust yourself to fit others comfortably. Alignment asks you to listen inwardly to the part of you that knows what feels honest even when it is not popular. One depends on external agreement, the other depends on internal truth. And over time, it becomes clear that only one of these can support a life that feels real rather than performed. Self-respect is not loud. It does not announce itself or seek attention. It shows up in quiet decisions, when you say no without excessive explanation, when you choose integrity over convenience, when you continue even if no one is clapping for you. These moments may seem small, but they accumulate into something powerful. They shape the way you carry yourself through the world, not as someone waiting to be validated, but as someone who has already begun to recognize their own value. And slowly, the need for constant approval begins to lose its grip. You start to see it for what it is, temporary, inconsistent, and dependent on factors beyond your control. What remains is something more stable, something no external voice can easily shake. A quiet understanding that your worth was never meant to be negotiated through others, but realized within yourself again and again through the choices you are willing to stand by when no one else is defining them for you. People's opinions change like wind. Your purpose must remain rooted. And if you observe life closely, you will notice how quickly the direction of that wind can shift. One moment, someone may speak of you with admiration, and the next, they may question your choices with equal confidence. What changes is not necessarily who you are, but how you are perceived through the ever-moving lens of other people's moods, fears, and expectations. If you build your life around that movement, you will always feel unstable, as if you are constantly trying to stand upright in a storm that never settles. Purpose, however, is not meant to move with that wind. It is meant to be rooted deeper in a place that external voices cannot easily reach. A rooted purpose does not mean you never face doubt or uncertainty. It means that beneath all of that, there is something steady within you that does not depend on approval to exist. It may bend under pressure at times, but it does not break with every change of opinion around you. And that is what separates a life that is lived from a life that is constantly adjusted to please others. The challenge is that people often mistake popularity for direction. When opinions are favorable, it feels like confirmation. When they turn, it feels like failure. But neither of these extremes truly define your path. They only reflect how others are reacting to it from where they stand. Your purpose was never meant to be measured by the agreement of those who are not carrying it. It was meant to be experienced, shaped, and understood from within, even if others take time to see it clearly. There will always be seasons when opinions are loud, seasons when everyone seems to have a different idea of who you should be and how you should live. In those moments, it becomes easy to forget that their voices are not the foundation of your identity. They are passing influences, not permanent truths. If you listen too closely to every changing sound, you begin to lose your own direction in the noise. But when your purpose is rooted, something different happens. You begin to move with intention rather than reaction. You stop rearranging your life every time someone misunderstands it. You learn to let opinions pass through without allowing them to uproot what you are building. And over time, you realize that clarity does not come from the absence of external voices, but from the decision not to be ruled by them. A rooted purpose does not require constant defense. It does not need to be explained to every passerby. It simply continues, quietly and steadily, even when misunderstood. And as you remain committed to it, something shifts within you. You become less concerned with the changing wind and more focused on the direction you have chosen to grow in. Silence your fear, not your voice. This is not a call to become louder in every space, nor a demand to prove yourself constantly, but a reminder of where true power is meant to be directed. Fear has a way of speaking first, before reason, before truth, before even your own understanding has fully formed. It arrives quickly, warning you of rejection, embarrassment, failure, and misunderstanding, as if its purpose is to protect you. But over time, it often becomes less of a protector and more of a barrier between you and the life you are capable of living. When fear is left unchallenged, it begins to decide what remains unspoken. It interrupts your thoughts before they reach words. It convinces you that staying quiet is safer than being honest, that shrinking yourself is wiser than expressing your truth. And slowly, without noticing it, you begin to associate silence with safety, even when that silence costs you pieces of your authenticity. But your voice was never meant to be negotiated with fear. It was meant to exist beyond it. Your voice is not only sound, it is presence, it is clarity, it is the expression of everything you have lived, learned, and understood. When you silence it too often, you do not just lose expression, you lose connection with yourself. There is a subtle disconnection that begins to form when you repeatedly withhold what you truly think or feel. At first, it feels small, almost harmless. But over time, it becomes difficult to recognize your own thoughts without first filtering them through doubt. Fear thrives on imagined outcomes. It paints pictures of worst-case scenarios and convinces you to live as though they are already real. But most of those outcomes never arrive. What does arrive, however, is the quiet regret of what was never expressed, the conversations never had, the truths never spoken. And that regret often weighs heavier than the fear that caused the silence in the first place. To silence fear does not mean to erase it completely. Fear may still appear at the edge of your thoughts, especially when you are stepping into something unfamiliar. But there is a difference between acknowledging fear and obeying it. One allows you to move forward with awareness, the other keeps you confined within hesitation. And each time you choose to speak despite uncertainty, you weaken fear's authority over your life. There is a quiet strength that grows in moments when you decide that your voice matters more than your fear. It does not always feel powerful in the moment. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, even fragile. But with time, those moments build a deeper confidence, one that is not dependent on being perfectly understood or fully accepted, but on the simple act of not abandoning your own expression. And as fear loses its control, something within you begins to open. You start to speak with less apology, think with less restriction, and live with a growing sense of honesty toward yourself. Your voice becomes less about proving something and more about expressing something real. And in that space where fear no longer leads, you begin to hear yourself more clearly than you ever could in silence. The moment you stop seeking permission, your life begins to expand in ways that were always waiting for you, but could not fully unfold while you were still asking others to authorize your existence. Permission, in its quietest form, often disguises itself as responsibility or respect, but beneath it can be a subtle dependence on external validation. You wait for someone to agree with your dreams before you act on them. You wait for reassurance before you trust your instincts. You wait for approval before you allow yourself to begin. And in that waiting, time moves, opportunities shift, and parts of your potential remain unopened. There comes a point where you begin to notice that no one is truly assigned to grant you permission to become who you are meant to be. Most people are too focused on their own uncertainties to fully define your direction with accuracy. And even when advice is given, it is filtered through their experiences, their fears, their limitations. If you rely too heavily on that, your life begins to take shape around perspectives that were never meant to hold your full future. When you stop seeking permission, something subtle but powerful changes within you. You begin to act from inner recognition rather than external approval. Decisions no longer require endless validation before they are made. You start to understand that clarity does not always arrive through consensus. Sometimes it arrives in quiet certainty that grows stronger the more you listen to it. And while this shift may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you have been conditioned to seek agreement before movement, it gradually becomes liberating. Expansion does not always mean external growth in the beginning. It often starts internally, in the way you think about yourself and your possibilities. You begin to consider paths you once dismissed too quickly. You allow yourself to imagine outcomes without immediately questioning whether they are acceptable to others. And in doing so, your internal world becomes wider, less restricted, more open to exploration. As this internal expansion continues, it naturally begins to reflect outwardly. You take steps you previously delayed. You speak ideas you once held back. You move in directions that feel aligned rather than approved. And although not everyone will immediately understand this shift, that no longer becomes the deciding factor. What matters more is whether you are moving in a direction that feels honest to your own understanding of who you are becoming. There is also a quiet strength that develops when you no longer wait for permission. It is not loud or confrontational, but steady. It allows you to tolerate uncertainty without retreating. It helps you remain grounded even when others question your choices. Because when permission is no longer the gatekeeper of your actions, responsibility quietly returns to you, and with it comes a deeper sense of ownership over your life. And slowly, you begin to realize that expansion was never something waiting outside of you. It was always waiting for the moment you would trust yourself enough to begin without waiting for anyone else to say it was okay. Rejection by others is often redirection toward your destiny, even though in the moment it rarely feels that way. Rejection usually arrives with a sharpness that can make you question your worth, your timing, your direction, even your identity. It can feel final, as if a door has not just closed but been locked from the other side. And in that silence that follows, the mind often begins to rewrite the story, convincing you that what was denied to you was also meant to define you. But rejection is not always a conclusion. Sometimes it is a quiet interruption in a path that was never fully aligned with where you were truly meant to go. There are moments in life when you invest deeply in something, an opportunity, a relationship, a dream, and you believe with certainty that it is meant for you. You prepare, you hope, you give your energy to it, and still it does not unfold as expected. In those moments, it is natural to feel as though something has been taken away. But with time, you begin to notice that what felt like a loss often becomes a turning point. Not because the pain was insignificant, but because it moved you away from a direction that may have limited your growth in ways you could not yet see. Rejection has a way of removing certainty so that awareness can enter. It interrupts attachment so that perspective can develop. And while it may initially feel like being pushed backward, it often creates space for movement in a direction that would not have been considered otherwise. Many people only recognize this in hindsight when they look back and see that what once felt like a closed door actually prevented them from staying in a space that was too small for what they were becoming. There is also something deeply refining about rejection. It strips away illusion and brings you closer to clarity. It forces you to separate what you truly desire from what you are simply willing to accept. And in that separation, you begin to understand yourself with greater honesty. You start to see which paths were chosen from fear of loss and which were chosen from alignment with purpose. This awareness, though often born through discomfort, becomes a foundation for more intentional living. What feels like rejection from others is not always rejection of you. Sometimes it is a misalignment of timing, direction, or readiness. Not every space is meant to hold your growth, and not every moment is meant to receive your presence. When something does not accept you, it does not automatically mean you are unworthy of it. It may simply mean it was never designed to carry what you are becoming. And as you move forward, you begin to realize that redirection is rarely gentle in the beginning, but it is often precise. It moves you away from what cannot sustain you toward what can eventually support you. And although you may not understand it immediately, there comes a point when you can look back and see that what once felt like rejection was actually guiding you quietly and firmly toward a version of your life that was waiting beyond what you first expected. Freedom begins when their opinions no longer define your choices. And this kind of freedom does not arrive loudly or suddenly. It unfolds quietly, almost unnoticed at first, like a soft return to yourself after a long period of forgetting. For so long, many lives are shaped not only by what they want, but by what they fear others might think. Choices are filtered through invisible judgments. Decisions are softened to avoid criticism, and even dreams are adjusted to fit within what feels socially acceptable. Without realizing it, a life begins to form that is partially lived by you and partially lived for the perception of others. There is a moment, however, when something inside begins to resist that pattern. It may not be dramatic. It may come as a quiet discomfort, a sense that something no longer fits, even if it once did. You start to notice how often your decisions include an unspoken audience. You begin to feel the weight of opinions that are not actually spoken, but deeply imagined. And slowly, you start to question why those unseen voices have been allowed so much influence over your direction. Freedom does not mean that you stop hearing opinions. People will still speak, suggest, judge, and assume. That does not disappear. What changes is the position those opinions hold in your life. They move from being instructions to being information. They become something you can hear without being ruled by. And that shift, though subtle, changes everything about the way you move through the world. When opinions no longer define your choices, you begin to act from a different place. You are no longer reacting to avoid disapproval. You are responding to what feels true. There is a steadiness that starts to grow in your decisions. You are no longer constantly adjusting yourself to maintain acceptance. Instead, you begin to notice which choices bring alignment within you, even if they are not immediately understood outside of you. This kind of freedom also requires a certain acceptance that not everyone will agree with your path, and that agreement was never the requirement for authenticity. Some people will only understand you when your choices match their expectations. When they do not, misunderstanding may follow. But you begin to realize that misunderstanding is not the same as being wrong. It is simply the difference between living your truth and observing it from someone else's perspective. As this freedom deepens, something important happens internally. The urgency to explain yourself begins to soften. You stop rehearsing your decisions for approval. You stop seeking permission in subtle ways. And in that space, your energy returns to you. It is no longer constantly spent managing perception. It becomes available for creation, for growth, for living in a way that feels more complete and less divided. And gradually, you understand that freedom was never about escaping people's opinions. It was about no longer letting them decide the direction of your life.